I never thought a single moment could reshape the foundation of my life. But it did. It didn't begin with lust or seduction. It started with silence. Long, echoing silences in rooms that once held laughter. I didn't plan on crossing any lines. I only wanted to feel seen. My name is Elena. I'm 27 years old, and if there's one constant in my life, it's the gnawing ache of being emotionally invisible. My mother, Vanessa, always taught me to be perfect. Hair in place, smile sharp, silence when needed. Love was currency in our house, and I never seemed to earn enough. She met Mark when I was 15. He was a calm presence, vastly different from the parade of egotistical men that came before him. Where others barked orders, he listened. Where my mother criticized, he offered small encouragements that lingered longer than they should have. I never called him Dad, but over time, his presence became a quiet comfort. As I grew older, the connection between my mother and Mark dimmed. They didn't fight, but they didn't speak much either. Conversations turned into transactional, exchanges about travel plans or real estate. Still, they remained married, bound more by appearances than affection. I moved out at 22, eager to build a life far from their cold, high-ceilinged house. That's when I met Gabe, dependable, structured, emotionally consistent. He worked in finance, loved order, and had a deep appreciation for predictability. At first, that stability was intoxicating. After years of chaos, routine felt like safety. But, as the years passed, our relationship became hollow. Dinners were eaten in silence. Affection was a formality. I often caught myself looking at him, wondering if he even saw me anymore, or if he ever really did. Then came the phone call that brought me home. My mother was off on another 3-week trip to Italy, chasing luxury and curated Instagram memories. Mark had undergone a minor procedure and needed help around the house. She called me, not out of concern, but obligation. "Elena, be useful for once. Mark could use a hand," she'd said, her voice as cold and clipped as ever. I hadn't stepped foot in that house for over a year. I packed a bag reluctantly, hoping to be in and out within 3 days. Mark greeted me at the door. He looked older, thinner. The quiet confidence I remembered had turned into something more withdrawn, fragile even. He smiled the way people do when they're tired of pretending everything's okay. We spent the first evening in a comfortable rhythm. I reheated leftovers while he insisted I sit and rest. He asked about my work, my upcoming wedding. His questions weren't intrusive, just thoughtful, careful. Like he actually wanted to understand, not just respond. Later that night, we sat on the back porch, an old bottle of wine between us. The cicadas hummed, and the air was thick with June heat. We didn't speak much at first, but eventually, he said something I didn't expect. "You always reminded me of someone trapped in a house full of locked doors." I turned to look at him. His eyes weren't predatory or flirtatious. They were tired, honest. "I guess I learned to pick locks," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. We both laughed softly, but underneath the laughter, something shifted. He reached over to pour me another glass. His fingers brushed mine, barely perceptible, but I felt it like static under my skin. I pulled my hand away instinctively, then hated myself for noticing. But he didn't react, just handed me the glass and looked out into the dark. We sat in silence again. But this time, it wasn't the same kind of silence. It felt charged, fragile, dangerous. I told myself I was imagining things, that my craving for warmth had created illusions. But as the evening wore on, I caught him watching me more than once, his gaze lingering a beat too long. Before heading to bed, He touched my shoulder just briefly. It was fatherly, supportive, but it burned like something else. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom. Every creak in the house seemed louder. I could still feel the weight of his gaze, the heat from his hand. I kept telling myself it meant nothing, that I was lonely, vulnerable, that nothing had actually happened. But a line had been drawn. A very thin, very dangerous line. The next morning he acted normal, polite, detached, and I followed suit, grateful for the pretense. But the air between us had changed. It was heavier now, full of unsaid things neither of us were brave or foolish enough to speak aloud. When I finally left 3 days later, he hugged me goodbye, longer than necessary. And in that brief, suffocating embrace, I knew it wasn't over. Something had started. Something that would not stay buried. And I wasn't sure I wanted it to. Here is chapter 2 of your story, carefully written with focused emotional momentum, sharp pacing, and character-driven tension. The section deepens the conflict and leads us directly into betrayal. That fragile, unspoken thing that passed between us on the porch. But you can't unsee what you've seen, or unknow what your body recognizes before your mind catches up. Back home with Gabe, life resumed its familiar rhythm. Quiet meals, absent touches, small talk laced with performance. He kissed me on the cheek and told me I looked tired. I smiled and nodded, pretending fatigue explained everything. But the truth was heavier. I felt hollowed out. My thoughts spun in loops, returning again and again to Mark, not to what he was, but to how he made me feel, seen, heard, wanted. The text started innocently enough. I messaged him to check in on his recovery. He responded with a thank you and a photo of the backyard sunset. "Still feels empty here," he wrote. I didn't reply, but I read that message 5 times. Days passed. Then a week. Gabe announced he'd be flying out for a client meeting in Chicago, 4 days away. The first day he was gone, I didn't text Mark. The second day, I did. "Let me know if you need anything," I wrote. His reply came quickly. "I don't need anything, but I'd like to see you." I stared at the message for a long time, heart pounding in my throat. The right thing would have been to ignore it, but I didn't. I told myself I was just visiting, just checking in. When I arrived, he looked surprised and nervous. We exchanged awkward small talk in the kitchen before retreating to the living room. He poured us both a drink, and we sat. In the growing dusk, light spilling through the blinds and fractured lines across the hardwood floor. We talked about music, about books, about things we used to love but no longer made time for. And then, silence again, comforting and full of something we didn't name. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. My body stiffened, then softened. His hand lingered against my cheek. I should have pulled away. I didn't. The kiss was hesitant at first, unsure, but it deepened quickly, fueled by years of repression and misdirected affection. Guilt hit me, mid-breath, but it was quickly drowned by the ache of belonging. I told myself it was just a moment, that we could pretend it hadn't happened. But moments like that don't stay small. They bloom like rot. The next morning, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. Mark texted once, "Are you okay?" I didn't respond. That should have been the end. But we're not wired to stop where we should, especially when the sin feels like salvation. It wasn't long before we met again. Then again. Always in secret. Always brief. We created a small world with no consequences. Just glances, touches, and long, wordless nights that felt too safe and too damning at once. I kept Gabe at a distance. He noticed but didn't press. He chalked it up to wedding stress, offered to postpone the date. I nodded, grateful for the delay I didn't deserve. My best friend Carla was the first to notice something was off. "You're different," she said one afternoon while we walked through the park. Distracted. "I'm just overwhelmed," I replied too quickly. She gave me a look, the kind only someone who's known you for a decade can give. "Don't lie to me, Elena. I know when you're lying." I changed the subject. She let it drop, but I could feel her watching me more closely after that. Meanwhile, Mark and I kept spiraling inward. We told ourselves it was just physical, but there were moments, too many moments, when our eyes locked and something unspoken passed between us. Something that hinted at longing too deep to be fleeting. One night, after Gabe had gone to sleep, I stood in the hallway staring at our wedding photo on the wall. My smile looked staged. His looked unaware. I pressed my forehead to the wall and whispered, "I'm sorry," to a man who didn't yet know he had been betrayed. Then, a week later, my mother returned. The moment I saw her face, something in me snapped. She swept into the house in designer heels, chattering about Milan, oblivious to the minefield beneath her feet. Mark was quieter than usual, watching her like someone watching a storm roll in. I couldn't meet either of their eyes. The tension suffocated me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked downstairs for water and found Mark sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. He looked up when I entered. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered, voice tight. He nodded slowly. "I know." But neither of us moved. We just sat there, silent in the soft hum of the refrigerator and our shared shame. The next morning, I left early, before my mother could ask why my eyes were red or why Mark didn't say goodbye. In the rearview mirror, I watched the house shrink into the horizon. But I knew the distance wouldn't change anything. We hadn't just broken the rules. We'd burned them. And now, all that remained was the slow, inevitable collapse.
The unraveling didn't begin with a bang. It started with a dinner. My mother hosted one of her elaborate homecoming meals: fine china, imported wine, and uncomfortable smiles. Gabe and I sat across from her and Mark, a picture of domestic success. From the outside, we were perfect. On the inside, I was shattering with every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Mark wouldn't look at me, not directly. His eyes drifted past me, his answers to my mother's questions clipped and polite. I knew that look, guilt dressed in silence. "You're awfully quiet tonight," Vanessa said to him, spearing a piece of salmon. "Just tired," he muttered. Gabe, ever the mediator, chuckled and said, "I'm always tired. It means you're working hard." I forced a laugh. But I saw it then, clear as glass. My life had become a gallery of performance, every gesture rehearsed, every glance a lie. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the guests had gone, Gabe took my hand and pulled me aside. "I feel like I don't know you lately," he said. I froze. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "You're somewhere else, all the time. It's like I'm reaching for someone who doesn't want to be held." I swallowed hard, shame climbing my throat. "I'm just overwhelmed. The wedding, work, family." He studied me, eyes soft, unsure. "Do you still want this?" he asked. I opened my mouth to say yes, but nothing came out. Silence, thick and final, settled between us. He nodded, as if he already knew the answer. He left the next morning for a business trip. No goodbye kiss, no promise to call, just a closed door and footsteps down the hall. 2 days later, it all came undone. Carla called me. I didn't want to believe it, she said. Her voice trembled with fury. But I saw the messages, Elena, I know. I went cold. What are you talking about? Don't insult me. I borrowed your tablet at brunch last week, remember? Your messages were still open. Elena? Mark? Are you serious? I couldn't speak. My lungs felt crushed under the weight of exposure. You need to tell Gabe, she said, or I will. I hung up. I couldn't breathe. Every wall I'd built to contain the truth collapsed in a single conversation. That night, I met Mark at a hotel. I told myself it would be goodbye. Closure. One last conversation to make sense of everything. But when I walked in, I saw him pacing by the window, jaw clenched, hands trembling. She knows, I said. Carla knows. He nodded. It was only a matter of time. We have to end it. He looked at me, eyes pained. Was it real for you? I hesitated. Yes. A long pause. Then he asked, so why does it have to end? I looked at him, really looked. A man who had once offered safety, who now looked like a storm. This wasn't a romance. It was wreckage we had disguised as love. Because we broke something that can't be repaired, I whispered. And the longer we pretend it wasn't wrong, the more we destroy everyone else. He sat down, silent, staring at his hands, like they no longer belonged to him. We didn't kiss. We didn't touch. We just sat there, strangers again, bound by a secret that had no future. I told Gabe the next day. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just sat there, his face vacant like he'd been hollowed out from the inside. With your stepfather, he said quietly. Jesus, Elena. I never meant to. Don't, he interrupted. Don't give me that. I tried to explain how lonely I'd felt, how dead I'd become inside our life together. But none of it mattered, not to him. You could have left, he said. You could have talked to me. Instead, you chose the one person who makes this unforgivable. He walked out. I didn't follow. Within weeks, the fallout became a storm. My mother found out through whispers and confrontations. There were screaming matches, shattered glass, threats of divorce. She called me a disgrace, called Mark worse. Mark moved out. I never found out where. And me? I stayed in the wreckage. Gabe canceled the wedding. Carla stopped answering my texts. My mother cut me off entirely, and for the first time in my life, I was truly alone. But maybe that's what I needed. I spent weeks in silence, sorting through the remains. I didn't chase forgiveness. I didn't make excuses. I sat with the ugliness, the betrayal, the truth. Love isn't always soft. Sometimes it comes wearing the mask of longing and leaves only destruction behind. I don't know if I'll ever make peace with what I did, but I know this. When you cross a line, you don't just step over it. You become it. It lives inside you. And some lines, they don't lead anywhere but ruin.